going to explore a lot of different facets of the game of golf, but I don't think there's any two names that attract more attention than the names of Tiger and Phil. And I also know that there's nobody that I know who's had more in-person exposure to those two and covering events for a lot of years than Bob Harig. So his book is called Tiger and Phil, Golf's Most Fascinating Rivalry. And Bob, you and I have crossed paths probably at some Ryder Cups and some other majors, but I don't think we've ever really talked in person. So welcome. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
What's it like making the media tour to get word out about a book? I mean, you've been writing forever, but this is kind of a more official gathering of your experiences. Is it a personal journey for you here?
Yeah, I'd say there's some of that. I mean, writing a book, it's you better really like what you're doing because it's a chore. I mean, it's work, and it's kind of been like almost a 2-year project. I think back to a year ago this time, going into the holidays, I thought I was in pretty good shape, like my pacing. And then when Tiger had the car crash, I had to make some adjustments, and I lost some time due to the fact that I got really busy with all of that. And all of a sudden I looked up on April 1st and I was way behind. And, it's not one of those things that you can just cram and do it all the night before, so it's been an interesting journey. Fortunately for me, it's a subject that I feel I know very well. I was there for all of their major wins, all 15 of Tiger's, all 6 of Phil's. Kind of go back to the beginning almost with both of them in some ways. I never covered Tiger when he was a kid or a junior or any of that stuff, but certainly from the time he turned pro, I covered both of their first Masters. I just had a lot of exposure to them. Obviously, their names have been so big in the game for so long. It's been a pretty interesting and gratifying ride, to be there to witness it all and to see what they've accomplished.
Yeah, there are so many fascinating facets to these two legends. One is ultra private, and the other never stops talking. One would, I think, step on your throat in his heyday to beat you, and the other one seems a little more engaging and a little more connected to fans and maybe a little more aware of perceptions. When do you think they became rivals? I mean, that's part of the title of the book. When did they start to notice each other and perhaps develop a little disdain for each other back in the early days?
Yeah, it's interesting because they are not the same age. And
Right.
so Phil had a head start, and they wouldn't have been rivals at that time. Phil's in college and Tiger's like 8th grade, freshman year of high school type of. So they were far enough apart that they might have been aware of each other. Certainly Tiger was aware of Phil when Phil got to college. You couldn't help but not be aware of Phil. He won the NCAA 3 times, individual title 3 times. He won a US Amateur. He won everything in Southern California. Tiger's from Southern California too, closer to LA. Phil was from San Diego. Tiger certainly would have been aware of this kid 90 miles down the road who was winning everything. But I'm not sure he paid him any mind back then.
Yeah, would it have? I was going to ask if it would have been in an aspirational sense, where you will meet some players today who would say when they were growing up, they wanted to be Tiger. I never got the impression Tiger really cared about being Phil.
No, I don't either. And that was something I tried to get at. And it was more, no, Tiger's goals were always beyond something like that. It wasn't that he had disdain for Phil. It was that he was thinking bigger. Jack was the guy always on his mind, and some of that has not been portrayed properly over the years. Tiger never set out to, at least in his early years, to tie Jack's major record of 18. He judged himself against Jack at the various ages. When did Jack break 80? What age? When did Jack first break 70? When did he do this? When did he do that? And Tiger judged himself by those standards, but it's sort of molded into, oh, he always wanted to break his major record. Well, of course, as he got going and he started to win them, of course that came into view, but that was never the goal. I mean, who sets out on day one and thinks they're going to win 18 majors? Who thinks they're going to win 15? Who thinks they're going to win 10? Phil's won 6, and it's incredible. So that to sit there and think you're going to win double-digit majors, I don't care how good you are. Yeah. I know his dad talked that up. Interestingly, his dad talked about him winning 14, which he was stuck on for 11 years. So, when did they become rivals? I think they became rivals when Tiger turned pro and started winning. And Phil was the guy. I mean, people forget. Phil was very, very well regarded. He won a tour event as an amateur. He was still in college. He shows up for his first event as a pro at the US Open. He had to qualify for that, but he was an exempt player on the PGA Tour because of that win that he had the year before. He never had to worry about it. He was out there. He started winning fairly quickly, not a lot, but he did start winning. And before Tiger turned pro, in fact, on the very day that Tiger won a third US amateur in a row, Phil won his 9th PGA Tour title that day. Nobody remembers it because Tiger was winning a third straight US amateur, and that got all the headlines. But Phil that day earlier was beating Greg Norman at Firestone to win it for the 9th time and move into the top 10 in the world for the first time. And so, he was the youngest player since Jack to win that many times before age 25. Phil was the real deal. Now Tiger comes along, wins 2 of his first 7 tournaments, wins the Masters the next year. And that's, I think, when it was on. And, Tiger certainly was aware of Phil. Maybe he thought less of him because he wasn't winning like he was, but eventually came to see him as a threat. And that's, we had a good bit of tension between the two of them, probably from about 2002 on.
Yeah. And that span that began probably the most bitter days of the rivalry includes what happened here in my home state at Oakland Hills at Ryder Cup in 2004. And I don't know that there'll ever be a time where Hal Sutton will be able to make sense of that pairing idea, because it could not have imploded more spectacularly, especially, I believe, if memory serves me, Bob, he tried it twice. So
yeah.
What did that do to the tolerance level of each of those men, one to another?
Yeah, well, it's a great point, because after the introduction of the book, my very first chapter is called Oakland Hills. And it's about the 2004 Ryder Cup, because to me, that epitomized the tension in their relationship. I could argue why it wasn't a bad idea to put them together. I talked to Hal extensively for the book, and he laid out his reasons. And a lot of people supported him at the time. They thought it was a great idea. In retrospect, it looks like a bad idea. And there's a lot of reasons that it looks like a bad idea when you know the situation that was unfolding at that time. Think about it. Phil won the Masters that year. He contended at the US Open. He finished second. He probably should have won it. He made a double bogey on the 71st hole. He was in contention for one of the rare times at the British Open that summer at Royal Troon. He had never had success there. Missed a playoff by a shot. And then he also contended at the PGA Championship, where I believe he was 2 out of a playoff. He was like 5 or 6 shots away from winning all the majors. He won 1, contended in them all. Tiger didn't contend in any of them that year. He was going through a swing change very quietly with Hank Haney, only won once. And so now you're going to put these 2 guys together at the Ryder Cup. Phil's coming on. Tiger's been struggling. Actually had fallen from the #1 ranking just before the Ryder Cup. And they're going to get along, and he's going to give Phil tips, and they're going to be chummy and all buddy-buddy. No way.
And didn't Phil change equipment the week prior to that Ryder Cup and then go off and kind of practice by himself?
Well, the equipment practice has been misconstrued. Now, Sutton was livid when he heard that Phil had switched to Callaway, which, by the way, he still represents. And you can understand it from Callaway's standpoint, that was going to get them a lot of publicity, getting Phil with their clubs right before the Ryder Cup. But it was viewed as a bad move because we all know it takes a little time to work them in. Now, I don't think he had all 14 clubs in the bag, Callaway's. He might have had 7 or 8. But the bigger deal for Phil was he was also switching the Callaway ball. And that's something to get used to. And the reason he practiced at another course was not only to get used to his ball, but in the alternate shot part of it, he was going to have to play Tiger's ball. And, look, it's very inside golf, but as we all know, at the pro level of golf,
a big deal.
You can only play one ball on a hole.
Yep.
You can't switch it out. Actually, for all of us, it's one ball per hole. But you and I, if we go play, I can play a Titleist on the first tee, and I can play a Callaway on the second tee. In pro golf, you can't. They have the one ball rule. So back then at the Ryder Cup, the rule was you had to play the same ball throughout. They have now changed that to they can switch balls per hole. So, but still, Tiger or Phil was going to always have to play Tiger's ball almost at least on every other hole, and probably every hole, because is Tiger going to switch his ball?
Right.
And the problem is that ball is a lot different than what most people play.
Yeah.
Tiger plays a ball that spins a lot, and that doesn't usually work for people. You want it when we hit the ball and it spins a lot, now it's going to spin even more, and it's going to go even more offline. Phil had to get used to it. He found that he didn't hit it as far. So he was working, and years later, when Phil criticized Sutton, he later apologized for it. But when he criticized him, he said, if he would have told us in advance, I could have worked with his ball. He told us that week, I'm scrambling to learn his ball. So you've got that dynamic. Now, I would argue, why would they ever consider putting him together in alternate shot? I mean, neither of those guys is, even at that point, Tiger was a pretty accurate driver very early, but the longer he went, the less accurate he was. Phil's never been an accurate driver. It's a bad combination in alternate shot.
As we remember now, as we can vividly recall from what happened on the 18th tee at Oakland Hills, the fence on the far left was not supposed to be in play, and Phil visited it at the end. I can't remember if that was their first time around or their second time around.
It was the second match, and they were actually tied.
Yeah,
they were all square on the 18th tee with it was Darren Clark and Lee Westwood, and they could have salvaged a point there if they win the hole. And amazingly, they lost the hole to a double bogey because obviously,
oh my goodness.
And the other thing is go take a YouTube of the Ryder Cup and look at the reaction on Tiger's face.
Well, I remember quite vividly.
Phil's ball peeling off. So I went deep on that Ryder Cup and talked to a lot of people. And, obviously in retrospect, it was a bad idea. They got waxed in that Ryder Cup. At the time, it was the largest margin of defeat ever. They came out of the first day down, I believe it was 6.5 to 1.5, and they were never going to recover from that. And it set a bad tone, and so, but if you look at the situation and we step back from it all these years later, why would they get along? Tiger is at that point in time, he finally sees Phil as a bit of a threat. It bugs him to no end that Phil's starting to get a little bit better. Yes, it's 8 majors to 1, but he knew how good Phil was. And the last thing he's going to do is going to be, chummy with them and start, giving them tips and all that stuff. And it's kind of fascinating to me how that evolved. And that's the only time they were ever paired together in a President's Cup or Ryder Cup.
Yeah. Did it ever get heated with them? I mean, we know we had the facial expressions from Tiger on 18 where he was just staring like off into the "you've got to be kidding me" distance. But did it ever get heated then, or at any point where there were words like Phil and VJ had with the spike issues at the Masters? Was there anything like that where they had a confrontation?
If anything, they didn't talk at all. They didn't collaborate much. They didn't discuss strategy. They kind of went on their own, and that's not good either. So no, and through all of this, if there was any disdain on either side, it came more from Tiger, but Tiger never really showed it publicly. He was never going to call out Phil vehemently in public. He was never going to deride him. He wasn't going to let anything be seen. It was more just inside, and maybe he might have said some things off the cuff that were picked up by others. I mean, and to my reporting, Phil never was disparaging about Tiger. There was the one time he tweaked him about his equipment.
Right.
And it was
Inferior.
inferior equipment. And actually, it's a backhanded compliment. He was saying, look, Tiger's beating us all with equipment that he's not using the best stuff out there.
Yeah.
Now, people took that to mean Phil was knocking Nike. A lot of people also took it to mean, no, he's not using the longer shaft. He's not using the titanium heads. In other words, Tiger was slow to change. Why would he? He was doing so well. Tiger used to hit a 43.5-inch shaft driver when everybody else was using 44 and 45. Now you got Phil hitting 46, 47. They've lengthened, but back then Tiger was using a shorter driver length, and it cost him distance. And people were like, man, what would he be doing if he would up his game with the equipment? That's what Phil was getting at more. It was viewed as he's knocking the company that Tiger represents. And some people did knock Nike back in those days. I don't, look, Tiger he could have won with a broomstick back then. So, but anyway, that was all another part of it. And it's really the only time that there was another issue later on where Phil or Tiger's caddy Steve Williams called out Phil, and that got a little heated. And that's in there too. I talked to Steve, and time has passed and feelings have mellowed. But back then it was pretty, intense.
One of my favorite aspects of observing tour players, whether it's coverage at a tournament or just watching on television, is to see how they behave during their rounds. John Feinstein has some very kind words about your book in the foreword. And he says, there's no one more qualified to write a book on Tiger and Phil than Bob Harig. He's probably walked more holes with them than anyone, with the possible exception of their caddies, and has been around for every important moment in their careers, both with one another and separately. I would love to hear some just recounting from you of different experiences you've had observing them, not playing against each other, because that doesn't happen very often, but just as you've been out walking with them. I've had only a couple of opportunities inside the ropes to walk 9 holes with Tiger when he was winning the final Buick Open, and I've been around Phil a little bit, but certainly not to the extent that you have. What are some of the, someday when Bob Harig decides to put the pen down for the last time and put his feet up by I was going to say fireplace, but you're in Florida, so that's hardly fair, but just put his feet up a little bit and reflect back. What are some of the in-tournament memories that come flooding back to you?
Well, in terms of my access to those guys, it was better during the pro-ams, practice rounds. I would walk inside the ropes with them and be able to chat with them here and there. Tiger and Phil a little bit easier. Tiger, a hole or two here or there. I might walk down the middle of the fairway, and he was very engaging and very trusting, because obviously there's certain things you're going to talk about that you're not going to use. He always trusted me, and if I was going to use something, I would ask him. I would pose it to him first. Hey, I want to ask you a question for something I'd like to write. And he was always good about that. Yep, go ahead. What? And then of course he was a little bit more reserved and subdued when it came to being on the record. And Phil was the same way. I probably walked more with Tiger than I did with Phil, but Phil was always really good that way. And they both have a unique look on things. Their questions about certain things were interesting, about the media or just life in general. As far as events, I think probably the highlight for me might have been, I happened to be behind the 18th green at Torrey Pines in 2008 when Tiger made that putt. And I just, I was not following him the final round coming in because there was so much going on. But as that hole was playing out, it became apparent, look, it's going to come down to this. He's going to need to birdie the last hole. And I got out there and I remember thinking to myself, he's going to finally lose. He's not going to win this one. Rocco's going to win the US Open. And then when you saw where he hit it, right. he hit a poor tee shot in a bunker. Then he hits a poor layup into the right rough. Not an easy shot to get close to the pin when you're hitting from the rough. And, Tiger did get it relatively close, 12, 15 feet. But I'm like, look, these greens are bumpy. They're Poana greens. They're not very smooth late in the day in California. And I'm like, he's going to finally miss one. Like, what's it going to be like when he misses one? And of course he didn't miss it. It went right in, and we had the epic playoff the next day. I mean, that was a great moment. Being at the 2019 Masters obviously was incredible. But so was being at the Tour Championship that he won that year.
Never seen a scene like that unfold.
Yeah, the way that went down on 18. I mean, really, any of it, the reaction he got throughout that entire year was incredible. It was just phenomenal how he was treated, how he was embraced. And, one of my favorite stories that I did in 2019, a year later, was I went back and found all the guys who played with Tiger for the first time, or a majority of them, young guys who would have been in their 20s,
who had dreamed of playing with Tiger probably all those years.
And some was like Joel Damon, Bronson Burgoon, who else? Sam Burns, who's now won a couple of times. Sam Burns played with Tiger in the final round of the Honda Classic that year and beat him. Tiger would have had to have Googled Sam Burns. He wouldn't have known him from,
right.
he wouldn't have known him from George Burns.
Right.
So he, and that was probably the case with a lot of guys. I'm trying to think where it was. I think it was at the Quicken Loans event in DC. So it would have been the final round he played with Bronson Burgoon. And afterward, they signed their scorecards. Tiger's taking pictures with them. He's signing autographs for him. I mean, imagine any other sport this happening.
Yeah.
Are players getting LeBron's autograph?
Yeah, only the dream team in Barcelona in '92. Yeah. That's about it. That doesn't happen.
So that was, and then of course they all remarked, what it was like to be inside the ropes, all those people. I'm not used to playing with this many people. I was very nervous. God, he strikes the ball unbelievably. The sound it makes with an iron. He was very courteous. He always would try to, let me putt out so that because obviously when Tiger putts, everybody scurries. So anyway, there's a lot of neat moments like that. I was lucky enough to be at Muirfield when Phil won that British Open, coming from way back on the final day. That was incredible to see that. It was just so out of nowhere. You're not expecting him to do that. Shoot 66, wins by 3. But there's been a bunch of them.
A lot of people have described that round of golf as maybe the best they've ever witnessed. What Phil did that day and how it separated him from the field. And yeah, man, you've had a front row seat for so much of this. And then we also have this moment in time when Tiger's personal world explodes. It explodes in a globally public way. It has the car accident, but it's all fueled by his behavior. And I've always thought that moment in time not only changed Tiger to a degree, but it gave Phil an opportunity. If he really, really didn't like Tiger, he could have piled on. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember that ever happening. In fact, it seems to me, and I'm deferring to you, you're the expert. You wrote the book literally on the subject. It seems to me like that moment and what followed after it was the turning of the channel in still competitors, but not bitter rivals after that. Is that an accurate observation?
Well, it's partly. I mean, What's interesting about that is you're referring to the scandal. Yeah. When Tiger was out, I talk about this in the book. Phil played for the first time in 2010 at Torrey Pines. We would have expected Tiger to be at Torrey Pines normally. He hadn't played there the year before because he was still out from the knee that he had after the US Open. 2008, he won there twice. Won the tour event and he won the US Open. Then he has knee surgery, misses 2009, misses 2010 because it's basically a month, 6 weeks after the scandal.
Yeah, Thanksgiving it broke, right?
Yep, right. So it was actually maybe almost 2 months.
Yeah.
And Phil came right out in a news conference before the tournament and expressed his hopes that Tiger would be back. He was incredibly conciliatory. He said, look, I reached out to him. I said, I want you to get out here as soon as you can. I hope everything's good. Amy and I want to help them as much as possible. And then, look, I don't want to answer any questions out of it, out of respect for him. You're right. He could have piled on. He never did.
Yeah.
In terms of the golf, it was a great opportunity for him to close the gap. And now he did. What was interesting, Tiger comes back, first tournament is the 2010 Masters. And he actually plays incredibly well for having missed 5 months of golf.
And after being somewhat lectured by Billy Payne, I believe, in the week, right? I mean, so that's all part of it. He's like, man, I finally came back here and I got that. So
yeah,
a lot of mental baggage there.
I dove into that a little bit too. And no matter what you think about what Tiger did, I think it's fair to say that what Billy Payne did was out of line. It was incredible that he would take that
I couldn't believe
that venue to lecture someone on that. I mean, it's like it was his first tournament back. They gave Tiger the venue to have his first news conference on the Monday, unheard of.
It's funny, Bob.
2 days later, he takes him down like that.
It's so funny. Here we are at the end of 2021 talking about this, and I can still vividly recall my reaction to hearing those comments from Billy Payne. And one of them was, do you really want to take a deep dive into the personal behavior of many of your members? Because as we've learned years later, there's a few issues going on there with the Bill Gates world. So anyways, I just thought it was as inappropriate as you were saying.
Everybody was so stunned they didn't know they didn't know what to say. Right. I mean, I think it took everybody a while to realize what was he doing. And but anyway, look, Tiger shot first round 68. He had never broken 70 in the first round of the Masters. And here in the tournament where he's least prepared, he does that. And he's in contention over the weekend. But going into Sunday, he was 3 or 4 back of Phil. And that bugged him to no end. Because, one, it was Phil. And two, he knew that Phil was going to be tough to catch. Tiger was very mad at himself for his third round. He thought he'd let a good round get away. He had a bunch of 3 putts. He didn't do quite as well as he wanted. The gap got a little wider. And he knew Phil Mickelson at Augusta had already won there twice. He was going to be tough to beat that day, and it annoyed him. And he had a bad practice session the next day. Hank Caney talks about this. It was almost like he was defeated before he started, one of the rare times. And, Tiger played poorly after that. He had a good U.S. Open that summer, but really the rest of the year he regressed. He was horrible. He fell way down. He ended up losing the number 1 ranking later in the year. Amazingly, Phil was never able to get to number 1. He had a lot of chances and he didn't get there.
Never did.
Never once has been number 1 in the world.
If you'd have given me that in a pop quiz, I would have failed it. I would have thought he'd spend a few weeks there at some point, just given how good he's been over all these years. I'm thinking about legacy, and obviously both of these guys in the world of golf, their legacies are firmly established, and the only thing left is to debate, greatness and where you would rank each one and that kind of thing. But I'm also wondering that if either of them somehow has a major left in the tank, and I guess Tiger would be the biggest question mark in that, just because of all that he's been through, it seems like it would only possibly be at Augusta. Is that now for both of these guys? I mean, Phil's winning on the PGA Tour Champions basically whenever he feels like going to play. But that's not what drives him. That's not his fuel. He doesn't need that money. It's just fun competition. Is Augusta the one that's circled on their calendar moving forward, even though they may very well tee it up in the other majors?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what made the PGA so surprising for Phil last year. You would have never thought he'd win on a venue like that. I mean, that was close to being like a U.S. Open. And so for him to put it together in a week like that was really incredible. I would give them some hope at an Open also. I mean, Tom Watson nearly won one at age 59. Length is not always a factor there. It's more shot making. It's more, how do you play it? Both those guys know how to play that style of golf now, running the ball up. Obviously St. Andrews, it's a shame for Tiger because, I think there's a lot of hope that he can be there next summer, but I'm not sure he'll be ready to be competitive. But I think it's a good opportunity for Phil. Actually, any of the Opens are a good opportunity for Phil. I was surprised how poorly he did at the Open this past summer, because he had contended at Royal St. George's 10 years earlier when Darren Clark won. And it was a venue that, if he was playing decently, he should have, he should have had a chance, given that the other factors aren't as keen. But still, Augusta, the length, the width of the fairways, the fact that they don't have to be perfect off the tee, the fact that they know the course so well, they know how to recover, and if they're putting, if their short game is on, yes, it's the place where they can do it, because institutional knowledge it goes a long way. And certainly in Phil's case, he still hits the ball plenty far.
A couple of questions left for you. In all these years of covering both Tiger and Phil, have you ever run crossways of them in something that you've written and gotten an earful from them or the agents or somebody who's called and said, Bob, what are you smoking? What's the deal? What's going on here? And kind of had to get into a little bit with them?
Absolutely. I mean, I had an issue with Phil just this past summer. I don't know if you recall that thing when he went to the tournament in Detroit with,
yes,
the Rocket Mortgage.
The Detroit News story that was really out of left field.
And they wrote about a past gambling indiscretion where Phil won $500,000 and some other guys, and they never got paid.
Yeah, from 20 years ago or something like that.
Right, and it came up in a trial over a mobster, and it was a weird tale, and Phil was furious about that. Well, I happened to write about it from the reaction of his attorney, who was shooting down the fact that the story was written. And Phil got mad at me, and I tried to explain to him, your attorney is who I quoted, was basically backing you up. And we finally, sort of came to a truce at the Open over the summer. Like, it was a little tense for a little while. We texted back and forth a couple of times, and he wasn't too happy. For the most part, we've been fine. He gets it. As I've explained to them and many people, we make double bogeys too. It's a fast-paced business, and sometimes we make mistakes or go down the wrong path. I never really had any issues with Tiger with anything I wrote, but I recount a story in there where I believe it was 2011 when he had missed most of the summer. Remember, he hurt his Achilles and his knee at the Masters, and he tried to come back at the Players Championship. He quit after 9 holes, didn't play again until the summer at Firestone, where he had won so often. And he was playing pretty poorly, and he was frustrated. And it might've been after the second round on the Friday. And I remember asking him something along the lines of, why don't you lower your expectations? In other words, like, who in their right mind expects, after taking all that time off, to come back and be so good? There's no minor league rehab starts in golf. In other words, in baseball, when a guy's coming back from an injury, he goes, plays a few games or a few weeks in the minor league team to get ready. You can't do that in golf.
You don't just go down to the Corn Ferry Tour and get a couple weeks in.
He can't. He wouldn't be allowed to. It's not allowed, because if you're exempt for a regular event, you can't play down. So you've got to take your lumps inside the ropes. And I remember he bit my head off pretty good for the question. Like, he was very abrupt. It annoyed him. Well, that's, like, in other words, the thought just, it was like insulting to him.
It was offensive
almost.
To him.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
How dare you?
That's not me. I don't, that's, in other words. And so, there was a few, every now and then there would be a few little tense moments when you're asking him a question. But the good news is he always let it go. He didn't hold it against me. He's done that to some people. And so I always appreciated that.
Last one for you. In the writing of Tiger and Phil, golf's most fascinating rivalry, the ideal would be you get a couple of hours to sit down with each of these guys, along with collecting your observations from years and years of covering tournaments. What was the response like when you asked each one of them?
It's a great question. And you're right. Obviously, it would have been great to get that kind of time with both. I never, ever expected that because I just know how they are and how it is. In Tiger's case, the problem with Tiger was in 2020, when I was doing the majority of the reporting of the book, we're in the middle of the pandemic. I couldn't get near him. I could talk with him casually outside the rope. We weren't allowed inside the ropes. We weren't allowed inside the locker room. What I would have done was approached him, just me and him, and explained to him what I was doing, just to professionally let him know. And then I would have said to him, I'd like to be able to ask you a question or two here or there as we go. He was never going to sit down. Tiger at the time was working on his own memoir. My guess is that has been delayed. And he would have been contractually forbidden from helping me. I'm not sure he would have helped me anyway.
Right.
But he might have helped me fill in some gaps. And I tried to get word. Finally, it was at the father-son, the PNC that he's going to play in a year ago, where it was finally time. I needed to tell him I'm doing this. I didn't want him to hear it from somebody else. And so I told his friend, Rob McNamara, and I asked him to have him call me. And he's like, well, he's going to want to know what it's about. And I'm like, Rob, I want to tell him myself. It's not for a story. And finally, I had to tell him. So then, of course, Rob tells him. And then Tiger tells Rob, okay, look, I know now I'm good. So he never called me. And I've not had a chance to speak to him since, because of course we know what happened.
Right.
A couple days later, he had another back surgery. He did not play early last year. Then he had the car crash. He's been out since, gone since. So even if I would have had a crack at him, that wasn't going to happen when he was recovering from those injuries. With Phil, I approached him a couple times about this, and he was sort of like hemming and hawing and a bit nervous, and like,
why do you think there's still nervousness on that topic for him? He's got nothing to lose.
I tried to explain to him, this book is going to make you look good. In all fairness, like, it can't make Tiger look good when you're talking about his record. I try to go down the road of suggesting that while Tiger might not have had a true rival, if there was one, it was Phil. Here's why. Phil won 4 of his 6 majors with Tiger in contention. He had some pretty darn good duels with Tiger. Doral, Tiger won that one. Pebble Beach in 2012, Phil won that. Phil started to get the better of Tiger later in their careers. They both had Butch Harmon as their coach at one time. And I tried to make it out. Phil, nobody's record is better than yours except for him. And it stands up compared to everybody else. And by the way, you were Tiger before Tiger when you were a kid. And he was on board with that, but then we never made it happen. Like I would ask, well, email me, and then like it didn't happen. And then finally I started running out of time. I kind of had to have the manuscript done by the summer. And I had, there's been a lot of tweaks and revisions and things along the way. But, and then he wins the PGA, and that becomes even a harder thing. But there's plenty of fodder. I interviewed dozens upon dozens of people to ask them. And let's be honest, are you going to really get everything from those guys?
Right.
There was a lot of things I would have liked to have asked Phil about that I had to recount through, obviously there's interviews that I've done or things over the years. I talked to people around them, their friends, their family, that sort of stuff. But, one thing that I missed was I recounted, but the year before Phil won his first major was a horrible year for him, 2003. His wife, Amy, and their son, whose name is Evan, their third child, they nearly died during childbirth. Both of them. It was bad. And, it shook Phil. He had his worst year. And he's talked about it some over the years. And obviously it fueled him going into 2004, which was one of his best years. but I would have liked to have gotten a little bit more from him on that. I think that was a big turning point in his life. And, there's not as much of that as I would have liked to have had. I would have loved to have asked him even just about the match when they had the $9 million match,
The worst optics ever.
Yeah. And look, I make the point that they got friendly before that, but I question whether it was sincere.
Yeah.
Like, was it done for business reasons? That spring they played their first practice round together at a tournament in 20 years. They had never played a practice round since 1998, and they finally do it in 2018. The one in 98, Phil took money off of Tiger and taunted him about it, and Tiger never played with him again. So, it's so I question, and look, who said they have to be buddies?
Right.
They live on different coasts, they're different ages. When Phil was already married when Tiger came out on tour. But it is interesting that they did knock heads a few times. They did mellow. They became collaborators for the Ryder Cup.
Right.
They became teammates finally later on, not playing together, but helping.
Well, I've had in the last few months a couple of different events where Jack and like Lee Trevino were there in ceremonial roles. I've seen them at a Champions Tour event, and they played a charity 9 holes. We've seen them over at the opening of the American Dunes course, and it makes me wonder if someday down the road, if that's the role that Tiger and Phil would play, or if both of them will be so fabulously wealthy and over with all of it, if the ambassador world is something they don't want to sign on for ever.
Yeah, it's a great question because Jack and Arnold handled that so well.
Yeah.
They aged very well. They managed to keep themselves somewhat in the spotlight despite not being competitive anymore. They played Champions Tour golf. They were self-deprecating about their golf. They had very, very robust design careers. Tiger and Phil both design courses, but it's not like to the level of Jack and Arnold. And you wonder if they'll get more involved in that as they go on. Tiger is seemingly being very, very selective.
Yeah.
And I think Phil has been too. But, do they become elder statesmen? They both should be captains for a Ryder Cup down the road. Will they be assistants for one another? That would be a good thing if they were. I think it would be great for them. It'd be great for the game. Whenever Phil's a captain, Tiger should be an assistant. When Tiger's a captain, Phil should be an assistant. It's a shame Phil wasn't an assistant when Tiger was the captain at Royal Melbourne for the President's Cup. I'm not sure why that didn't happen exactly, but and look, if that doesn't happen, I think that tells you a little bit something about their relationship, that maybe it isn't as great as we'd like to see it become at this stage.
Fascinating. I guess that's why it's in the title of the book, Golf's Most Fascinating Rivalry, right. Tiger and Phil. And Bob, thanks for kind of taking us inside the ropes of how it all came together. I'll look forward one of these days to seeing you in person. And in the meantime, I can't wait to dig into the book. So
yeah, great. Thank
best
you.
wishes on its success. And of course, here we are talking you and I are talking 15 days before Christmas. So folks, there is still time to grab this one for the golfer in your life. And Bob, I don't know if you knew this, but that's pretty good timing on your part to release the book right before Christmas.
Well, hey, full disclosure, the book is available for pre-sale, but it won't be actually in your hands until next year.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah,
I sit corrected then. I did not know that.
No, I would not want to mislead anyone. The publishers love getting the word out about it. And I have no idea why there's such a time gap, but that's typically golf books come out in the spring when the weather's better and people are thinking about golf and the majors are right around the corner. So, but they love the idea of people buying it for their friends for Christmas too. So,
hey, whenever you happen to get it, it'll be a good read. That we know for sure. So, Bob, thanks so much.